Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, which has been hosted by AHDB Beef and Lamb. My name is Chloe McKee, and I am the Knowledge Transfer Officer for Beef and Lamb within AHDB. I'm delighted to bring you tonight's webinar on prime beef selection. Our presenter this evening is Steve Powdrill, National Selection Specialist within AHDB. Steve is well known within the industry for his knowledge and expertise in the supply chain and selection, having worked within the industry for over 35 years. So the plan of action is that Steve will run through a presentation and there will be time for questions at the end. You will all stay muted throughout the webinar, but if anyone would like to ask a question, then please type your question into the box on the side of your screens. I will then ask Steve your questions at the end of the presentation. Hopefully there won't be any technical difficulties, but please bear with us if there are any. So without further delay, I will hand over to Steve.
Thank you, Chloe. And that was a modest 35 years. Good evening, all. I hope you enjoy this. I'm not used to normally speaking to a screen. I'm normally used to speaking to plenty of people sat out there in front of me. But hopefully this all goes well. Just really on the screen there, we're going to run through the virtual selection program for cattle. Understanding cattle and carcasses, as you can see at the top of the title there. And what we're going to do is I'll show you how the virtual program actually works. It is available online and it's available in the cattle guise and the sheep guise. So if anybody wants to use it thereafter, it is on our website. But really just trying to explain and get people to understand hitting spec, what it means to hit spec, obviously financially, but I understand also that it's not always that easy to hit spec. There are simple things like supply and demand, exchange rates, weather, feed availability and cost, logistics of when you've only got one ready, and things like cash flow are also important. But really these are the basics and basic principles of understanding that there is a market for everything at a price. And if you can hit that spec, then hopefully the return is certainly better than hitting something or being out of spec. Now on the screen is the R4L, and the R4L, as we talk about it, if you remove your cursors to the side while you're looking at the screen, and then there's only one cursor on the screen, if you look at this beast here, an R4L, all the profiles I'll explain in more detail later are very straight profiles. It produces this side of beef on the right hand side there, which is the R4L carcass, and then when we cut through roughly here, that opens up. You can see the ribeye, the eye muscle. I call that the roadmap of the carcass. On there, enough flesh, enough fat, and an R4L suits at least 80% of the marketplace. When we view that and we look on the grid, so just dropping the grid down there we can see clearly the R4L sits nicely in the green section. What I am noticing at the moment that there is quite a trend for O+ and 3. So something quite plain looking actually suits a lot of the marketplace at the moment, so long as it's not too fat. But certainly the R4L, if we can get most commercial cattle hitting that spec, really does do the job at least 80% of the time. Looking at the classification grid, and just to explain it, we have conformation down the left hand side, conformation talking about shape, E, U, R, O and P. It's called the Europe grid or classification grid. It's used throughout Europe. Anything that's got the shape of an E, all the profiles are very full, very rounded, what we call very convex. The U's are similar, but not quite as rounded and exaggerated. And then the profiles, the shapes on an R, are straight and blocky. The O's and dropping down to the P's, all the shapes on those animals and on those carcasses are very concave. Think of a cave going in. I like to think in general terms, an R, a U and an E, those shapes generally come from the suckler type cattle, and R's, O's and maybe down to P's at times come from more the dairy influenced cattle. Nothing necessarily to do with overall quality, just purely to do with shape, and obviously will affect meat yield. Fat class runs from a 1, which is very lean, up to a 5H, which is very fat. Unfortunately, at times I see fat classes 6s, 7s and 8s. If there were such a thing coming through, clearly well out of spec. So in this green area, yes, the vast majority of the industry are looking for product, and that's where the best prices are. R4L, as I said, sits there. An E or a U, coupled maybe with a fat class up to a 4H, is a good butcher's lamb. But we're probably only looking at around about 8% of the marketplace. And the reason why they'll take a slightly fatter carcass is that over the years, historically, butchers would cut a piece off the carcass, keep it in the chillers, and the fat would actually protect the meat and keep it in a better condition longer as well. But also on an E and a U, there's more flesh. So the eye muscle on the E and the U are much fuller, much rounder, and there's certainly that more covering. You can take that covering of fat. Whereas if you've got something down here that's weaker and a smaller eye muscle, it struggles then to carry the amount of fat. So anything around this area is deemed as really out of spec. Just while we're on that grid, there is another grid out there. So just clicking down onto my specification sheets on the VIA, video image analysis, there is a grid there. So some of you out there may be used to this or seen this. This is the 15-point grid. Looks quite confusing to a lot of people. But basically, if you look down the left-hand side, it's E, U, R, O, P, each one split into 3. And then across the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're the levels of fat, each one of those split into 3. And basically, instead of the R4L, a big section in there hitting spec for some companies, what they're saying is that little square there is the one that really I am looking for and I will pay a premium on. If you drop outside those, then you start to get the deductions. So it's really trying to fine tune that specification. So again, out there, some people use this, but what I'll be talking about mainly tonight is going back to the other grid where we can see there, as I say again, what hits spec in the main R4L. When we look at cattle then and trying to understand where we look on a beast, where we look for conformation, we click on this one here. Doesn't matter what breed it is, black, Angus type, where do we look for conformation? Conformation, 3 key areas. This is the round here on the back end. We've got the rump and loin, secondly, and then over across the shoulders. Not in any particular order, but basically we look at 3 key areas for conformation when we make up the conformation score. So for example, and this is where a lot of people tend to fall down. We look at the back end when a beast has got its head in the trough. So as we stand there, we'll look at the back end and view that and say, wow, we'll send that in. It's got to be a U for conformation. You get the kill sheets back, and unfortunately, it comes back as an R, and you think someone's classified it wrong typically. But if the back end is a -U, the rump and the loin are only an R, and the shoulder is only an R, overall, it's an R. It's 2 out of 3, and it doesn't matter which way around those 2 out of 3 are. So when we go to look at the round, we look where the tail hangs and look and stand behind the beast. And if it forms a perfect circle each side, and from the side, it forms a perfect circle at the back coming out, it's an E for conformation. If it falters slightly, it's not an E, it's a U. If it's straight, like this one, and blocky from all angles, it's an R. Starts to sink in a little bit, it's an O, and starts to sink in drastically, it's a P for conformation. Then the key area to me is the loin. And the loin is made up down the center of a beast's back of the spinous processes. Off the spinous processes run the transverse processes, and these are the short ribs just here. So from these points here to the center of the spine there is where the sirloin is developed. So your sirloin steak comes from. And what you're doing there, you're handling the depth of flesh from the center line to these tips here, but also on these tips, the only thing put on those tips there is fat. So for example, you grab that loin, there's only a small depth of flesh there, and those tips are really hard and sharp. That's telling you that that beast is not ready. It's a store beast. But if you put your hand around that loin and you think, yes, it's rather well fleshed, you feel those tips, you can still identify each one of those tips with a nice little bit of covering on, it's absolutely spot on. But if you put your hand around there and you're thinking, well, that's quite full, but hang on, it's soft, it's spongy, and I'm really struggling to feel those tips, more than likely it's gone too fat. And what I like to think is whether you're handling cattle or sheep, once the loin is finished, that animal is fit and ready to go. Next point is over the shoulders. So looking at this spot here on the shoulder, imagine that spot on the shoulder the other side. And if from that side to that side, it's very sharp and pointed here in the middle, then it's a P for conformation. If there's a little bit of development between those two, it's an O. If it almost nearly starts to level out between those 2 points, it's coming an R. If it is starting to level, it's a U, but perfectly level between those 2 points, it's an E. So don't forget, it's 2 out of 3 that make up the conformation. If we then look at fat and where fat is laid down, key areas for fat, each side of the tail head. So each side of the tail head, these little blocks of fat start to build, called tail head or tut ends in some circumstances. And in really sort of drastic stages, when something's getting really fat, those two key points, each side of the tail head, join up across the middle of the tail. On the tips of the transverse processes for fat there, we need to handle as well, as I mentioned earlier. And then one of the other areas is here on the ribs. So put your hand flat on the ribs. And if you run across, and it's like running across, as I call it, some metal railings, then there's nothing on that beast. If you put your hand though flat on those ribs, you can still identify each rib. There's a nice little bit of cover on, it's spot on. But if you put your hand on those ribs just there, and it's one cushion, soft cushion of fat, and you're struggling to identify those ribs, more than likely it's gone too fat. An area here, so look where the stomach then joins the back leg. There's a thin piece of vellum here, and then as it starts to join the stomach here, the gut, it starts to fill out with fat. That's called bed fat there, and that's another key indicator. Another one here is over the shoulder. So a similar shape of fat that builds up each side of the tail head starts to develop over the shoulder. And then here underneath the front legs, the brisket. So this is the area here, this brisket point here. So what you're looking for is that depth and or the width of the brisket. So the old-fashioned day of picking a beast, as I call it, butchers would wait for a beast to come into a ring in a market and wait for one to walk through that got a brisket like a loaf of bread or a rugby ball. Nowadays, if it's got one of those, it's deemed as too fat. Other key areas under here are if it's a heifer, so long as she's not in calf, she'll start to spring in a bag. And then also under here, if it's a male and the testicles have been removed, then the cod fat will start to develop and start to appear here under the legs. Other things to take account of as well when you're handling cattle is the breed, and the breed will influence the thickness of the hide. So anything more native bred tends to have a thicker hide and more hair than continentals. Bull hides are thicker as well. One other key thing to note is this is the left-hand side of a beast. People do get mixed up, but this is the left-hand side. So when you're facing the one way and the beast is facing the same way, your left-hand side is the beast's left-hand side. Handle the loin always on the left-hand side, because on the left-hand side, the kidney fat hangs loose in the rumen down here. So handling the left-hand side, you get a true reflection of depth of flesh and fat on that loin. However, on the right-hand side, over the other side, the kidney fat sticks to the underside of that loin. So potentially you're grabbing a depth of kidney fat as well. So wherever possible, handle on the left-hand side. So there's a beast with its jacket on. So what we're able to do now is look at some of those assessment points with its jacket off. So here, for example, we've got the tail. So looking at the tail head here, this is fat class 4L. Look each side of the tail. You can just see these pockets of fat here and this one developing here. And what we've got here is a slider that we can change the fat levels on that tail head. So if I slide that back to the fat class 1, You can see there very plainly, no fat, very smooth each side of the tail head. Let's start to grow. So fat class 1, 2, 3, 4L, 4H, 5L, and 5H. And there you can see those two big blobs of fat each side of the tail head. For the ribs then, let's have a look at the ribs. And here on a 4L, you can still see the ribs clear, just here, just a nice covering of fat. Take that back though to a fat class 1. See how sharp those ribs now are, and let's put some fat on it. So fat class 1, 2, 3, 4L, 4H, those ribs are disappearing, 5L, 5H, and now those ribs have completely disappeared. Looking then at the brisket, so here's the brisket on a fat class 4L, there's the development there, and the width just here on the brisket. Take that back to a fat class 1. Look how narrow that brisket is. No development here at all on the brisket. But let's build that one up. So fat class 1, 2, 3, 4L, 4H, 5L, and 5H. And there you can see the depth and the width of that brisket. I'll take that back once more, just so that you can see either top or bottom how that brisket really does reduce down to basically nothing. Conformation then, shape. So conformation, round, we're looking at the round here. So as I was explaining earlier, this is classification R, straight profiles, straight profiles. Let's take that back to a P. Now we can see concave. So lacking any development there and here from the side. So let's start to flesh that up to a P plus, minus O, O plus, R, minus U, a U plus, and an E. If it was just that easy to grow cattle, we'd all have one of these machines. Loin then. Loin, again, to me is key. Let's take that right the way back to a P. And there we can see spinous processes running along the top center line there, transverse processes here and here. There you can see the two. And let's start to flesh that out. So P plus, minus O, O plus, R, a minus U, a U plus, and an E. And now you can see how deep that loin is, how full that loin is, all the way down to the back of the shoulders. We've also got a virtual beast. So this one tends to stand still, and as I call it, does as it's told. You'll have had cattle yourselves in a crush or trying to get them to stand. Well, this one I can make stand. So here we've got an R4L. Look on the ribs here, just a nice covering. On the brisket again, a nice covering. Let's start to turn this round and have a look at it from different angles. So turning that round, shoulders nice and square and blocky, brisket nicely developed. Turn that round again, ribs are still visible. Turning that round, all the way around, and again, nice and straight and blocky. And these pockets of fat, just a nice covering each side of the tail. So that's your R4L. Let's though look at a beast here, so we can click on any of these white squares here, click on this minus O2. There we've got a beast that's not finished, store beast. Look at the ribs for a start. Look at the brisket, no development here. Let's turn that full on. So very narrow through the shoulders. Let's turn that further around, all the way around. Here we call these the plates or the rumps each side, falling away each side. Lacking development here, and then looking down the center line here, down the spine, falling away over the shoulders, lacking any development. Let's compare those two with this one here. So clicking on the R5H. So the R5H is something that is finished, as in shape-wise, but being kept too long, too fat. Here, the ribs have disappeared. If you can see this bulge here starting to appear over the shoulders, and then this development of this brisket here. So turning that head on, there you can see the brisket, turning it sideways on, look at the development there over the shoulders, a fat, pocket of fat, ribs have disappeared, but also can you see this here, this pocket of fat here, if I turn it a little more sideways, this is that bed fat here really built up in the flank. and then take that round. Look at these two pockets of fat, one each side of the tail head. So from there, let's have a look at the eye muscle. So the next stage on is looking at the meat. And here we've got the eye muscle or ribeye of the R4L. This is the backbone here. This is the rib bone here. And if we look at that, there's a nice ribeye steak. But on here, there's a few messages. This little line here is connective tissue or gristle. Can be caused and can be exaggerated by putting a beast through a growth check. So the idea is when you're growing animals, grow them on a nice even growth plane. Otherwise, this starts to be exaggerated if you're putting it through a check period. And certainly that, from a consumer's point of view, is a no-no. If we look at this eye muscle then, on here, what we've got three types of fat. This fat here on the outside is the external or subcutaneous fat. And that's okay to that degree. Any fatter, it would more than likely need to be trimmed for the vast majority of outlets. But this here is absolutely fine. Then we've got two other types of fat. The little white flecks in here, and I'm sure most of you have heard and know it as marbling. And marbling is a good fat. Marbling, what happens is when you cook it, these little pockets of fat melt and they create little holes. Well, create holes within the meat makes it more tender. So it's a good fat, makes it more palatable, juicy as well. So yeah, it's a good fat. But you only get marbling when you get the other two fats. So that's when you've got to be careful, because the marbling is intramuscular fat. And then we have this pocket here, this one, starting to really build up. And this is intermuscular fat. And intermuscular fat, once it gets really beyond this, is very difficult to deal with because you have to take it out. So there's the R4L. If we move on to the R4H, leaving a beast dependent on time of year, dependent on breed, dependent on feed quality, the amount of, everything like that. Probably 3 weeks or so, 3 to 4 weeks. It depends on the animal. And as I say, everything else. There's a typical R4L, but let me just change this to a typical R4H. There you can see the difference. So going from the 4L to the 4H, a real buildup of fat, and certainly these pockets of fat and this big pocket of fat here really starting to build. If we then go back to the R4L, and let's go on to the R5H. Wow, look at the amount of fat on that. And that becomes really difficult to deal with, because the fat, in a lot of cases, they have to pay for that to be taken away. In some parts of the industry, maybe worth 20 or 30 pence as a biofuel, but again, limited to who actually uses that and utilizes that. Then we get these little bits of flesh. And these little bits of flesh then are stripped off and go into mince. The latest figure I've seen on mince, the amount of mince going into, or beef mince being used, is around about 56% of beef is being used as beef mince. And beef mince is sold in value terms of VL. That stands for visual lean. This mince here is probably 70 VL. That's 70% visual lean, 30% fat. And that's the product, the stuff on the shelves that fetches and commands more than likely the lowest price. This piece here in the middle would eat lovely, but you can't sell that as a ribeye steak, because that is what a ribeye steak looks like. When you take the backbone out and the rib bone, there's a ribeye steak. But if you just take this piece out in the middle here, struggling to sell that as a ribeye steak. So all along the lines, dealing with something like this, all you're doing is devaluing the product all the time. And this is some of the leaner part of the carcass. When you look beyond this and you look at the brisket and you look at a flank on a beast of this classification, I've known people actually throw that away. And what we have to consider with this is that when we look at something like this, what it's cost to actually get that animal to that state, because it's taken a farmer, producer, their time to feed it. The feed costs, which I'll come back to in a moment, it then takes someone time to strip all this carcass down, with a lot of products either waste or really devalued. And coming back to the value or the cost of actually putting that fat on in the first place, we've had some work done, but again, depends on a lot of things, on the weather, the feed type, the animal, etc. But it takes almost 4 times the feed energy to put fat on as it does muscle. So feeding an animal, taking an animal beyond where it should be, is a real costly affair. So, you know, the emphasis there is really try and, when an animal is ready, try and let it go, get rid of it. And if it's too small, don't do it next time. Change your breeding strategy. If you're getting animals too small and too fat too quickly, look at the breeding, look at the EBVs, and look at what they're actually being fed. A couple more eye muscles on there I just want to show you. There's the R4L. This one is an O+3. Look at the difference in colour. Darker flesh, whiter fat. That's actually barley bull beef. The white fat, anything intensively fed, and barley will give a whiter fat. If I drop down to a -O3 just below it, the -O, the conformation is a little bit weaker, so there's less conformation and less shape on it, less fleshing, but look at the difference in colour. So go back up, O+3, -O3. That one is an extensive fed steer, and you can see the difference in colour of fat. The carotene in the grass gives it, so silage, maize silage can also give that colour of fat. And if we drop down to a P+3, as we call it, hat rack territory, look how narrow that eye muscle is. And look how the fat then becomes a greater issue. Even though there's only a fat, it's only a fat class 3, because it's lacking flesh conformation, that fat becomes more of an issue. And another one here, going back up to the -O3, we can take a steak off that, or the industry can take a steak off that and utilize that meat. If we push a beast, so this is more dairy influenced, if we push a dairy influenced type beast from a -O3 to a -O4L, which I'll click on next, this is what actually can happen. That is what can happen. So there, trying to sell a steak off that is going to be actually very difficult indeed. So -O3, taking it to where it needs to be, pushing it that little bit further can influence the fat there and really put the consumer off when that actually is put in a pack before them. Going on here as well, just looking at some of the other things that we have on here to show you. Carcass cuts. So on here, we've got a side of beef. So we've got a side of beef. So dependent on the audience, we can move that around and go through the different cuts. So if we click on this little bit here, there's the rump. Some of the work that we've started to do on the rump, for example, instead of taking a slice off the rump, we now seam these muscles out. So individual muscles here mean that you can actually cut across each grain rather than with some of the grains or multi-diagonal and present it in a better form for better eating quality. So if we click on the subjoints there, just let me show you. Here's a premium rump steak, a premium bistro rump steak, sorry, or a premium prime rump steak. And those are those single muscles actually taken out. So we can do that. We can also, looking at the specification sheets, one of the things I wanted to cover off tonight was Chamber of Horrors. Don't be afraid, it's not that bad, but we nicknamed it Chamber of Horrors because looking at this, bruising. So looking at the bruising on this carcass here, on the shin, on the back leg here, you can see it running down. Now, not only is that an animal welfare issue, but also a meat eating quality issue as well. Because when you trim this bruising off, the problem is you think you've got all the bruising, but it runs throughout all the seams. So we say that, please, if you've got any handling facilities at home, make sure there's no sharp objects sticking out of any pens or anything when animals walk past. Animals don't necessarily stop and say that hurt. They just keep filing past. Consequently, also, if you've got any trailers that you use or any transportation, please make sure there's no sharp edges that can damage these animals as they're being loaded or unloaded. This one here, more bruising. The one on the left hand side, this on its stomach, on its flank there, that one's been down for some time. This one here on the right hand side, we thought had been caused, if you see these lines here, by using a stick. But we've found out that that was going up on a double decker on the top, bruising the rumps here and all the way across the loins. This one here was very severe. And if you can visualize these are sides of beef in an abattoir, and all the way, as you can watch my cursor, from the tip of the tail, so there's the rump, the sirloin, the forerib, right the way to the back of the shoulders. These were Holstein type cattle. They were transported on a double decker on the top deck, and the roof wasn't high enough, and they've rubbed the backs all the way. That actually became a trading standards issue. This one here, these are stick marks, and stick marks now are a reportable offence, but you can clearly see those stick marks there. There's an abscess on the shoulder, again just showing. An abscess, this one is an abscess that's been taken out of the back of a beast, really caused by injecting with a dirty needle. That one they found, but who wants that on the Sunday lunch and dinner plate? You can see that one, and thankfully that was taken out. But using a dirty needle is a no. Ideally use a clean needle every time. If you're doing batches, maximum is 10. But really it's common sense. At the end of the day, it's animal welfare, but also meat eating quality as well. This one here, more injection damage there. This lump here cut out of the middle of a rump there. And that rump is no good now, and probably only can be used for diced or minced. This one here, more injection damage, and what's happened here, the abscess has dried up and formed a callus. There's a hard ball of gristle. Imagine getting that in the middle of your Sunday lunch again. Thankfully that was found, was able to be cut out of the silver side. And this one here, just to show you, liver fluke. Liver fluke, I hear latest figures are costing the beef industry somewhere in the region of £80 a beast. This year we've been quite fortunate in one way, and the weather has been quite dry, and there's not been too much fluke about, but there will be some fluke coming through the abattoirs certainly, and certainly in older cattle. But please try and stay on top of fluke, get feedback where you can, and really do things like fecal egg counts and work with vets. On here, we've got lots of other things. Just one thing I just want to pop through is beef quality. So what is quality? We've got carcass quality and meat quality, two entirely different things. Carcass quality is when we talk about classification, weight, yield, colour and blemishes. And the industry at the end of the day is looking for consistency. We've got a fantastic product in this country, but we're not very consistent in what we put out there. Meat quality is about appearance, functionality. So functionality, talking about how long it takes and how easy it is to cook, microbiological status. You will see that we have got some clean, dirty livestock videos as well. Please have a look at those. And at this time of year, one of the things in the abattoirs at the moment, they're having issues with dirty livestock coming through. And again, what we've got to think about is that as producers, we're actually meat producers. And that these abattoirs that we take them to, or livestock markets or collection centres, at the end of the day, we're dealing with a meat product, with a food product. Nutritional status and eating quality, tenderness and flavour and juiciness are all about meat quality. There's quite a few things in here, but a couple of things I just wanted to show you is this here, hip suspension. So whether or not anybody has seen or come across, here is on the right hand side is a straight leg side of beef. Achilles straight leg hung, we've seen for years. What's happened is that we looked at what we called then the blueprint eating quality of beef meat, and the industry started to hang them by the hip. This one on the left hand side is hip suspended, because the one on the right hand side, its leg is not in its natural position. But the one on the left hand side, this back leg is more in its natural position. So when we lift the leg up, looking at the right, this one on the right, from this position here, and we lift it up there, these muscles here get compacted. But by letting those muscle fibers hang on the left hand side in its natural state, you've more chance of a better eating quality product. And a lot of the industry and a lot of the specifications now require product to be hip suspended. Not every abattoir can do it, but again, you know, they're moving down the lines of looking at doing this because it does enhance eating quality. Lots more things on there on beef quality and flavour. So diet is important. Grass-based forage diets give a stronger flavour, preferred by British consumers. Aging, not the age of the animal, but maturation. And maturation is so important when it comes down to eating quality. So on this system here, I'll just close that tab. There are lots of things here you can see in the specification sheets, all things on killing out percentage, video image analysis, dressing specifications. It's all on there. So again, you know, it's available online for anybody to pick up and run with. Please feel free to use it. It was designed with you guys in mind. We've had colleges, I know, certainly using it, but it's a fantastic piece of kit. And on there, you can see on this left-hand side, just to show you, we've got the same thing on sheep. So we've got the prime selection and everything about the sheep, very similar to the cattle side. So from me, I hope you've found that reasonably enjoyable. There's a lot to go through. It is difficult trying to explain all this when you're talking to a screen. But again, I hope you've found it useful and will use it in the near future. Thank you very much indeed, Chloe.
Thanks, Steve. While I'm waiting for some questions to come up, I would like to remind everybody that the presentation has been recorded, so it will be available to watch back on the AHDB YouTube channels, along with other previous webinars from AHDB Beef and Lamb. If you would like to look at the virtual selection programme further, go to AHDB Beef and Lamb website, under the Better Returns programme section, then Tools, and then under Tools you will find the virtual Beef and Lamb programme. So the first question is taste a quality characteristic? This is very subjective, so how can it be measured, Steve?
How can taste be measured? Only, as far as I'm aware, by taste panels, and it's an individual's taste at the end of the day. How can taste be measured? Yeah, as far as I'm aware, it's just on taste panels.
Okay,
and it is very subjective at the end of the day.
Can I feed an animal to improve the conformation?
If the animal hasn't got the genetics there in the first place, no. You can only take an animal with known genetics to a shape. So, for example, anything more dairy, you would never get to an E in conformation.
Okay. And how much do dressing specs affect the overall weight?
Dressing specs affecting overall weight. Good question. There are 3 dressing specs. The vast majority of the industry only dress to one specification. So if we, has everybody gone off screen now? Chloe, can everybody see the screen?
Everyone should still be listening. Yeah, we can all see the screen.
Okay, just to show on that one, just quickly. So the dressing specifications here, the vast majority of the marketplace dress to this UK spec here, spec 3, where they take off the cod fat, crown fat, thin skirt, bed fat, and brisket fat. And that's an agreed dressing specification by the industry. If you send a beast in for private kill, they tend to dress it to standard specification, which is the top one, leaving all those bits on. So if we flick through from spec 1 to spec 3, so spec 1 is standard specification, UK spec was spec 3. That means a difference of about 2% reduction for males and 2.5% reduction for heifers. But the fatter the beast, those percentages go up a lot more.
Thanks, Steve. The next question is, why have the abattoirs lowered the maximum weight?
Why have they lowered the maximum weight? Oh, they're cruel. They're terrible. So what they've done is, and the reason why they've done it is, if we look on here, or some of the reasons. So weight issues. Okay. Look at these 3 steaks. So in old money, they're all 8-ounce steaks. This one on the right-hand side is the top one. The middle one is the middle one. this end one is the bottom one. Now, if we look at them on the tray, these eye muscles or steaks, the large one or larger facing one is off a 390 kilo, the middle one's off a 350 kilo, and the other one's off a 290 kilo. Now, it's about not only getting the steak to fit the pack, but it's also about the thickness of the steak. So you can see here that this smaller one, looking face down, is actually the thickest steak. Now, most people out there can cook. There are a number that still can't cook, and on the pack, if it said 2 minutes each side for medium rare, this steak and this steak would have different cooking properties. So it's about being able to give the consumer cooking properties that they can say on a pack 2 minutes each side for medium rare. This steak, or this one here, 2 minutes each side for medium rare, would be burnt, but this one would cook nicely. The other thing is, if you look at the shelves in the supermarkets and the pack size, and everybody says, oh, the supermarkets, it's the pack size that we've got to make our steaks fit. Well, if you make the pack any bigger, instead of 2 steaks being £7.99, 2 steaks become £12.99, and 2 steaks at £12.99, you can buy 3 chickens and you can have 3 meals for, and that will turn people off that product. The other thing is that if we look at packs as well, many abattoirs are asked to do a pack run, 5,000 packs of 2 steaks in a pack. If you look at the one on the left-hand side, there's 2 8-ounce steaks in a pack. I know I'm using old money there, 2 8-ounce steaks in a pack, and someone wants 5,000 packs of those. Now, the abattoir can't afford to give away a gram, but trading standards say they can't be so many grams under as well. But they cut them off the right size specification cattle at the right thickness. They get 2 8-ounce steaks, but then some larger cattle come through. They end up cutting them the same thickness as these two, but they end up with 2 10-ounce steaks in a pack. Consequently, there's 4 ounces too much. Now, someone says, well, it's easy. Take that 4 ounces off there, and then you have a 10-ounce and a 6-ounce. But the problem is, what do you do with the 4 ounce? The 4 ounce then is only worth minced or diced. So there are some of the reasons why they've tended to lower the weights. I know a lot hover around that 400 kilos, some go up to 420. I do know one out there that's down to that 380, 390 kilos. And I get the feeling that in the industry out there, they're only calling for smaller carcasses and smaller cattle.
Thanks, Steve. That's really helpful. The next question we have, this person is shut down with TB, so they can't sell their cattle to market. So they need to finish them and take them direct to the abattoir. They have Limousin cattle and they've never finished young cattle before. What weight should they be getting the cattle to?
Right. It's not about weight. It's about what they can take those cattle to. I would speak to someone, a nutritionist, and get them in to weigh up and have a look at those cattle, see what the potential is, and look at finishing them on an agreed ration. It's not necessarily about weight. Everybody thinks weight pays, but everybody, you know, us humans are all different shapes and sizes and take us all to the same weight. I'm not necessarily tall, and I would say stay small, fatter and dumpy if someone just fed me.
Thanks, Steve. The next person has put, we agree with you that a cost comparison for putting fat on an animal versus meat, and they want to finish at 3s rather than 4s, but face big penalties for 3s or below. We struggle to get within less than 1 places consistently on the 15-point grid, particularly with regard to fat, which means we have to aim for 4 minus to avoid 3 minuses, but means the cattle are fatter than we would like. Are there any electrical or mechanical ways to get more accurate results, similar to ultrasound, softness measuring devices, or fat measuring scales?
My gosh, that was a big question. I believe out there are some instruments, bits of kit being tried. I keep asking to have a look at some of these. I've seen the odd one, but nothing is quite yet proven. The problem is with some cattle and sheep that they lay fat down in different areas, and it's hard just to sort of establish then on the overall carcass what that fat classification will be. If someone's taking them to a 4 minus, is what you said, I think, Chloe, I don't see a problem with that. I think that's really taking it to the full potential. In fact, in the 15-point scale, quite often the 4 equals is okay. And dependent on where you're sending it, I know someone who operates a 15-point scale, and a 4 plus is actually okay, so long as it's got the conformation to carry it. So again, it's just understanding wherever you're selling them, maximising your return on their particular and personal payment grid. But as yet, a piece of kit hasn't as I know of actually come out. There's I said lots. There's a few out there that I keep hearing about, but I've not seen anything that can actually do it spot on. And the other thing is, in the industry, live and dead, I personally think we could do with something like a body scanner. But let's face it, how many hospitals, for a start, can afford a body scanner?
Okay, thank you. Could you speak a little about kill-out ratio, please? What is the rule of thumb?
Killing out percentage, I'm assuming that is. So killing out percentage of a beast from live to dead. So on average, we say a beast kills out from live to dead around 53%. But that will vary. So you can get some really good suckler bred cattle that will kill out 63%. And you can get some old screw cows that will kill out 38%. So there's a huge variance. There's probably 25% variance there. But rule of thumb, around about 53%. The vast majority of it is to do with gut fill, stomach content.
Thank you. How much of a problem is gristle from growth check?
How much of a problem? I don't know in percentage terms, and I couldn't actually say, it's this amount. But that's one of the reasons, and nobody's asked, why did some of the, I know one of the reasons, but why did some of the abattoirs all of a sudden say, let's cut down the number of moves in cattle? These things, number of moves in cattle, lowering the weights, I'm with you guys. And if there's anybody from an abattoir listening, I think they're with you as well. But all of a sudden these specs come in overnight, and all of a sudden the industry has to adhere to them. And there might be 3 years of beef in the process that you can't do anything about. But gristle, what was the question? What was on about now? Gristle.
Yeah, how much of a problem is it in the growth check?
It's what I was getting back to then was, was the supermarkets and the processors were trying to say that if we don't move the cattle as many times, the likelihood is that we'll reduce the amount of gristle in the carcass. Because if you don't keep moving cattle about as much, so as soon as you move an animal on, put it on a different ration as well, it has a check for a period. And I think part of the reasoning behind it, and it wasn't probably explained at the time, was to reduce the amount of gristle in animals. And you'll know yourself, whoever's asked the question, that if you grow a beast yourself, breed it, feed it, and finish it yourself, the likelihood is obviously it's going to reduce the amount of gristle. It's only the cattle that are moved about quite a lot that are going to suffer from these growth checks.
Thanks, Steve. And the last question, unless anyone else has got a quick one, then please type it in, is cool cow grading is listed on the header. Is there a video to accompany this?
Is there a video? We did a video many moons ago, and when you introduced me at 35 years in this industry, it was probably going back then even. But if you look at the cool cow grading, we did one, basically, and I'll click on it in a second, because then there were quite a number of producers finishing their own cows. Now, the cows tend to get sold and go to specialist finishers. However, on here, there's the carcass classification grid, which we click on. And if we look on the explanation of an O plus 4L, so there we've got a cow, you can clearly see. And then again, if you run through Fat and conformation comparisons. We've got a cow there. We've even put little horns on it. Should we have done? I don't know. But going back then, and then on the specification sheets there, we've got some points there about price reporting, a grading called cows poster that we even created as well. So when they brought the old grades back in the market after the BSE days, so we've got a grade 1, a grade 2, a grade 3, a grade 4, and all explained. So there is that information on there, and we did have some videos, but I don't know whether we've got any left. And they were, I don't know even if they were videos or CD-ROMs, but hey, but there's that information on there.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, plenty to go out on there.
Yep.
We have another question. Does the automatic grading on the 15-point grid read white fat as well as yellow, as do bull beef, and are they coming out leaner than on the old grid?
I'd like to know what that person's experiencing, because by the sound of that question, that's what they're getting, that it's reading differently on white and yellow fat. I have heard anecdotally that on white and yellow fat, the machine sometimes doesn't quite get it right. Hey, who does get it right? Is there a machine? Is there a person out there that gets it absolutely spot on? So I am hearing that the machine also can get it wrong and can be influenced by the white against the more yellow fat. It's only what I've heard.
Thanks, Steve. That was our last question, so thank you very much. Thank you for that brilliant presentation, and thanks to everybody there for listening. I would like to remind you again that the presentation has been recorded and it will be available on the AHDB YouTube channels, along with other previous webinars, should you want to revisit it. The recording of this webinar will be emailed shortly in case you need to recap on anything heard tonight. So thanks again and have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.